Assalamu alaikum. I welcome you all to this hybrid event on the green financing and economic recovery of Pakistan in the backdrop of COP26, the climate goals. As we all know that the COP26 is approaching and we're all heading towards how we can meet the commitments of fighting climate change and the targets it would need. In the light of this, STPI today has hosted this event, a hybrid event, in which we are going to have to launch two presentations, two reports, one on the debt swaps for nature and the other one on the economic green recovery of Pakistan, especially in the energy and the power sector of Pakistan. To begin with, I would like to give the floor to Dr. Abid Suleri, the Executive Director of Sustainable Development Policy Institute. He has joined us online for the moment, and then we can proceed ahead. So Dr. Abid, it's over to you, please.
Thank you, Dr. Hina. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. And I can see in my video stream, Mr. Shahjahan Mirza Sahab is present there. I can also see Mr. Chris Warner and Dr. Sardar Moazzam and Mr. Faisal Sharif. A very warm welcome to all of you for sparing time and joining us. And as Hina mentioned, today's discussion is focused on green financing and economic recovery, especially in the context of NDC that Pakistan has, revised NDC that Pakistan has submitted. And if you go through this NDC, you would find that Pakistan, while has an ambition to reduce its emissions by 50% till year 2030, only 15% of reduction can be made possible through country's own resources, and 35% is subject to availability of international finance. And that's where I think green financing it becomes extremely crucial and extremely important. Again, quoting from NDCs, Pakistan has adaptation needs of 6 to 14 billion per year, where 70% goes in infrastructure and damage loss, whereby a clean energy transition would require a total of 101 billion by 2030. Now, just to give you a back of envelope calculation, for example, if we have to roll back on Sahiwal coal power plant, so we just try to see that how much will it cost in that case, and we realized that it would be around 1.2 to 1.4 billion dollars that are required to roll back any single coal-based power plant in Pakistan, and that also include, apart from your alternative cost of providing energy, the dispute settlement cost, because government of Pakistan, as you know, have already provided sovereign guarantees to these power generators, and the moment we try to roll back any of those coal-based power plant, the generators, they would go to dispute settlement bodies, arbitration, international arbitration court, and that's where we will have to pay the damage and the cost of litigation as well, apart from all others. So, of course, while Pakistan, like the rest of the globe, is committed towards a green future, green and clean development, we also need to see that we require green financing. Now, looking at some of the available tools of financing, we know that the Climate Finance Fund, which actually had to have $100 billion per year, that is semi-functional or non-functional. A lot of discussion would be there in Glasgow on it, how to turn it functional, because right now, if we look at the numbers for year 2020, although it says that $80 billion were deposited in this fund, but then we know that many of the funds were relabeled or rebranded. So either those were existing loans or those were existing technical assistance commitments, which were rebranded as Climate Financing Fund. So loss and damage mechanism, the financing mechanism. This is something where we will be debating and discussing in Glasgow next week. But right now, the two innovative approaches on which my colleagues would be discussing is debt swap for green recovery that Pakistan can rely on, and then green recovery from COVID-19, how we can channelize some of the funds provided for COVID-19 for green recovery. So these two reports, STPI researchers, they would be presenting for your critique, for your validation, for your endorsement, for your questions. The esteemed panel which has joined us today. And I hope that your feedback that would provide us an opportunity to improvise and refine our findings, and then take a dossier to COP26 Glasgow with us. Thank you very much again for joining us.
Thank you so much, Dr. Abid, for setting the scene. We are really honored to have Malik Amin Aslam Saab, Minister for Climate Change, Special Assistant. Unfortunately, I think he's on the travel and he'll be joining us in a few minutes. So we probably have to take him in the middle whenever he joins in. He's in Saudi Arabia. Just to begin with the agenda setting, as we could see, and the concept note of this green financing and the economic recovery has already been shared. But just in the light of the audience and the people who have joined us, we are seeing Pakistan as an emerging economy facing lots of challenges in terms of environmental problems and climate change impacts, and it ranks above around among the 5 most top vulnerable country. So it becomes very critical for Pakistan development programs and mobilizing finances to mitigate and adapt to those challenges. And the clean energy in the heart of this, I think, could play a very significant role. And the government of Pakistan has been very much ambitious and making good plans towards making it happen. But for us, it would be really able to identify and highlight what would be the requirements from the financial resources in the to overcome such climate change impacts. Other than that, after the outbreak of COVID-19, Pakistan has been facing the economic losses for around 1.1 trillion during the fiscal year 2021. And the fiscal deficit also remained the 7% of the GDP. So in the terms of extreme weather conditions, it had faced around 3.8 billion loss in the environmental front. So considering all that situation and considering that we have to recover from this pandemic and this continued waves that we are facing through, we have to be very mindful of how we are recovering and how we can adapt and we can recover better in a more resilient and environmental friendly and climate friendly way. So in the light of this, I would just like to introduce our esteemed panelists, our guests for today. So we'll be joined by Mr. Ali Raza Bhutta, Secretary, Power Division. He'll be joining online at the end of this. We are really honored to have with us the Managing Director, Mr. Shahjahan Mirza, Managing Director, Private Power and Infrastructure Board, and he's also Chief Executive Director of Officer of Alternate Energy Development Board. So we welcome you at this, and we are also really pleased to have co-authored this publication with PPIB on the green recovery. So we are really thankful for their collaboration and their continuous support to this report. Next, we are privileged to have Dr. Sardar Muazzam Saab from Managing Director, National Energy Efficiency and Conservation Authority. And we're really fortunate to have engaged in the national energy conservation programs. He holds a PhD in public policy and he specializes in the area of energy environmental policy. Thank you for coming. Thank you. Then we are also joined online by Mr. Ali Kamal. He's the Chief Sustainable Development Goals at the Ministry of Planning, Development and Special Initiatives. He is a graduate of Qaid-e-Azam University and he's been working on the international trade, exchange rates, fiscal, inflation, and growth. Next, we have Mr. Faisal Sharif. He's a Director of Project Appraisals, PPIB, and he's a dynamic and progressive professional, having more than 17 years of experience in the energy sector, with a sound understanding on the implementation and formulation of government strategies and policies. He's also one of the co-author of this report that we are going to launch. So welcome, Faisal. We are really pleased to have Mr. Chris Warner with us. He's a senior technical specialist at the World Bank. He has joined us from Islamabad office, and we are really pleased to have you. Thank you. Next, we have Mr. Hartmut as a coordinator on Pakistan-German Climate and Energy Initiative from GIZ. He's a climatologist and is working on the politics of climate change. And he's acting as a coordinator of the Climate and Energy Initiative recently, and we are really fortunate to have you here, sir. Thank you. Next, we are joined by Ms. Kashmala Kakakil, who is also part of this esteemed panelist. She's a climate finance specialist. She has worked on resilience programming with Climate and Development Knowledge Network, and she has a quite vast number of experience in this field. Dr. Waqar Ahmed, he's a Joint Executive Director at STPI. He's also a member, Board of Directors at Khyber Pakhtunkhwa Board of Investment and Trade. He has also joined us online because of he's available in KP at this moment. Then we have our in-house colleague, Dr. Sajid Amin. He's working as a research fellow and heading the Policy Solutions Lab at STPI. He's a macroeconomist with a focus on social content in macroeconomic policies, with a clear focus on drawing lessons to reform public policy. Thank you, Dr. Sajid. Then it's myself and Dr. Fariha, who is also a research fellow at STPI. She's an economist and working on the evidence-based policy making in Pakistan. Thank you so much to all the distinguished guests and panelists. To begin with, I would like to give a floor to Dr. Sajid Amin in the interest of time to begin with his presentation on debt swaps for green recovery, options, challenges, and the way forward. Over to you, Dr. Sajid.
Thank you, Dr. Can I have a mic? Do we need the mic?
No, I think it's
good to go.
It's good to go.
Great. Thank you. Let me go directly on the point of discussion that we are trying to make. Given that I have just only 10 minutes, we're already a bit late. But before I go into a presentation, the broader idea of today's discussion is not kind of recommending debt swap as the only or a very concrete solution. The broader idea is to at least see how they can work and to what extent they can work and how can they be made work better if there are any possibilities. So the idea broadly is to generate a kind of debate because we have been hearing from government of Pakistan that one of the options for green financing or the climate action financing, it has been debt swaps. So we thought to come with some kind of discussion that what are the possible options that can be explored and what are the challenges particularly when you are going for debt for swaps. So the broader idea is to start a debate in order to kind of come to some systematic policy the strategies in order to identify debt swaps and make a better use of them maximum possible. More or less, we are taking this crisis of COVID-19 as an opportunity to do something on the debt swaps or debt for nature swaps. They have been in the fashion over the last 40 years. But this crisis has reiterated. And there are some new opportunities that are arising, which can help kind of seed debt for swaps into a broader economic policy making. That is the broader idea. Can you please? So the three key messages which are coming from this PowerPoint, I just thought to share it on the very beginning. The one is that green recovery has a strong economic base. So any support that you are lending for a green recovery, you are actually lending that support to the economy and economic case. You are lending that support to producing more jobs, producing more economic activity. So there is evidence, and most probably all of you know, that $1 spent on the fossil fuels has a potential to create 2.7 jobs. But if that dollar goes to green energy, renewable energy, it has a potential of more than 7 jobs, producing jobs. So the one point is that any activity, including debt swaps, if you are implementing them to support a green recovery, you're actually supporting an economy and you are supporting overall development. So the second is that the countries like Pakistan with a limited domestic fiscal space, challenging external accounts, and a very low access to international climate finance so far requires some very well thought out policies to finance climate action. And one of them can be debt swaps, but definitely it will take a very systematic effort to reap any benefits from the debt swaps. Currently, I think we are mixing somewhere a debt relief, temporary debt relief with the debt swaps actually. So this is one point that I would like to highlight. And particularly, it will take at least 4-pronged strategy if we have to have debt swaps. Possible options and opportunities for debt swaps remains to identify. Going through your external debt profiles, you have to identify that what are those debts which can be swapped and who are the partners against those debts and what will it take and against what interventions in the environmental upgradation or the climate action need to be conditioned on those. So the first one is the identifying those possible options. And then there are serious trade-offs as well. Thanks to my discussion with Chris Warner as well a couple of days back, because it creates some serious trade-offs. So on the one, it is the Ministry of Climate Change definitely having more resources, more pool of resources, revenues coming in Pakistan or any developing countries to finance economic recovery. But at the same time, it can bring some implications for finance ministry in terms of your credit worthiness in the international market. How when a country is going for debt swap, request for a debt swap, there can be some implications on the rating and how does lenders see it. Availability of lending or the borrowing in the international market may decrease or the cost of borrowing increase. So it ultimately asks for a net gain or the net cost benefit analysis of going for the debt swaps actually. Who will be negotiating? Will it be Ministry of Climate Change or will it be Ministry of Finance, both at federal then at provincial level? So developing countries, including Pakistan, need to set some very clear mechanisms for the debt swaps. Most probably, I think at this stage, I'll be discussing more in detail. Pakistan and any other country like Pakistan needs to work on the both sides. One is the forming an alliance of the developing countries for the debt swaps, promoting a debate on debt swaps. And also kind of a capacity building to negotiate and implement a debt swaps. These are the key messages which actually are coming from PowerPoints that I'll be just running. Please next. The external climate finance expenditures expectations are humongous for Pakistan. As Dr. Sleri also mentioned, we are expecting annually somewhere when you combine mitigation and adaptation from 16 billion to 40 billion US dollar per annum to go your to actually implement the climate priorities or the green financing or the green energy priorities. Please. But much less is coming. If the gap is actually widening over the time. See, the upper bar shows, the upper panel shows the commitments of the multilateral development banks for the climate financing for emerging economies and what is coming to Pakistan. Actually, see, I think highest was the 1.35 billion a year. Otherwise, we remain low, below the $1 billion actually. And you see the gap, you require a $40 billion and you are actually having around on average $1 billion a year. So the gap is humongous itself. Please, next. Only financing needs for green transportation by 2030 for Pakistan are more than $38 billion. It means roughly $3.85 billion a year. And what we are getting from the total climate finance from external accounts, from the external partners, MDBs, is less than 1 billion or around 1 billion. So only if we have to finance the green transportation in Pakistan. So this actually really speaks how big the gap is. Please, next. Unfortunately, the fiscal space, both including domestic resources and external resources, remains very limited and is likely to remain limited. If you see the bottom panel, the top panel, bottom row, the very blue line, the longest blue line is showing the current account deficit by 2026. And this is actually increasing compared to the bottom blue of the same bars, which is 2021. So it's outperforming the ongoing years in terms of creating deficit. So Pakistan is going to have, these are the latest forecasts from IMF coming. And if you see all in the remittances in percentage of GDP almost remain unchanged, rather decreasing over the time. And then also budget balances a kind of a bit improvement. But if you see the trade account, which is the one of the largest contributor to the current account of balances deteriorating, again in absolute terms over the time. If you see the last line, blue, some light blue compared to the dark blue, we move from $25 billion to $37 billion. And the revenues also are not growing. From the domestic tax revenues and the non-tax revenues are almost flat, with 3 percentage points change over the next 5 years. From 2021 to 2026, we move from roughly 14% to 17.5%. So fiscal space from traditional sources, both from internal and external sources, remains limited, and that actually further stresses our reliance. It further strengthens our reliance on the external finance. Please, next. Pakistan needs some innovative thinking on the climate finance if it has to finance, and it has to, given its very high vulnerability that Dr. Hina has already. We don't have any choice. This is not a game of choice, actually. We have to do it. And it has been taking some of the steps. If we go on the green, the recovery from the COVID-19 fiscal stimulus that has been put forward to recover from COVID, it has a component of the green stimulus package, which so far has been reported to create 85,000 jobs. But we need million more, millions, tens of millions we need. Green Euro bond, WAPDA has already raised some $500 million US bonds. And that for nature remains one of the element also put there that government is trying to, and that is what we are focusing more on. And then definitely there is a ecosystem restoration fund. Next, please. Why debt for are getting a kind of it's getting a re-popularity. There has been more, particularly since 1987. They have been in the business, but they were at a very minor scale, roughly below $1 billion. But there is now discussion going on 2-3 major reasons. The one is the heightened vulnerability of developing countries to climate change impacts like extreme weather, and Pakistan stands on the top 10 actually on this one. Higher financing needs, actually, that I've just shown you on that they will be increasing as we move forward. And the fiscal space is not only limited, but it may be shrinking. So limiting our capacity to finance climate action, coupled with the already higher debt, particularly the external debt. On average, developing countries has 44% of their GDP going for the external debt. The external debt makes 44% excluding China. The number is roughly 41% for Pakistan, the latest number, the external debts. So all these are pushing, are making a kind of ground that there are discussions on. And I think present debt situation, there is a discussion going on at the Paris Club and many others, that the present debt situation is somewhere may go, particularly after the global, the COVID crisis, can get back to the debt levels, high debt levels of the crisis of 80s, like our 90s, where in particularly after the 70s global oil prices hike, there was roughly a net loss of public debt default of roughly $50 billion US. And if we take kind of the same default ratio that was 6.1% that defaulted at that time, the default expected now is $480 billion. And there is a discussion that if we can just save 10% of it in terms of debt swaps, and at the 55% of the discount rate, which was most recently given to Argentine. So it can save roughly $20 billion for the financing of climate finance sections. So rather than the kind of wasted in 80s, roughly 450 billions, there can be some sort of, if you can bring some mechanisms for debt swaps, so you can at least use these losses to finance climate actions. So please next. So this is just a very standard picture that how it can help. It gives you, but you can move next. I have discussion there. This is what we have been discussing. Pakistan seems mixing debt relief with debt swap. Actually, for the time being, I think when we see the literature coming on the debt swaps, while we are claiming debt swaps, there may be a temporary debt relief or the debt postponements. So this is why we thought to have some discussion on that. At least we have to have a clear understanding what is the debt swap and how does it work, because then we will be able to put some strategies or the actions which can actually lead to. So please next. So this is, but this poses some serious challenges that needs to be considered and tackled if we have to have debt swaps. And when I say we, it is not only the Pakistan, it is the developing countries as a whole. But as we were working on this report on the Pakistani context, we have tried to bring more Pakistani context. And the first is the credibility trade-offs. And the lending market may take it as a signal of not having capacity to pay and can affect future borrowing, both in terms of lower availability and the higher cost of borrowing. Who will lead the debt swap actually? Is it the climate change related, environment related departments, or it is the finance, those who have actually to go to the international market for more debts if they have to go at any point of time. So there remains some sort of that who will be negotiating. It's not clear currently that who can be the preferred partners for the debt swaps. It can vary. I mean, bilateral, for example, for Pakistan, it can be China as a starting point because it has a higher share of in that. Multilateral MDBs, what is their position on this one? How is the position different of World Bank from the IMF? And that needs to be, kind of assessed, explored to find better partners. And then consortiums like the Paris clubs, they can. So we need to identify in Pakistan case as well that who can be the starting partner. And the absence of mechanisms to negotiate and implement debt swaps, they are completely missing. And if we have to take debt swap as long-term solutions, the one point that we are trying to highlight is that debt swap is not a short-term solution. It is long-term, and we should take and it is going to evolve, we think, as a long-term green financing instrument over the time. So we have to take it as a long-term, and we need to make preparatory arrangements and issues around the alignment of incentives, particularly when it comes to a large share of public debt is from the private sector. It is held by the private sector. So what will be the incentives, particularly for the private sector? Because it may be sometimes easy to negotiate at country to country level, government to government level, bilateral level, but when it is coming from the private sector, so this will be a challenge actually. Next. But I think there are solutions. That is what we are proposing, which can minimize these challenges and the risks actually. But definitely they are just proposals at this stage. There has been work going on this one. But nothing concrete has yet come out on the debt swaps, because the resurgence, particularly after the coronavirus, is just a bit new. But there is some changing landscapes which can maybe make these debt swaps different from that of 80s that we compare with when we see these challenges. For example, the one is that a more systematic global effort for debt for nature, as was debt relief during the COVID-19, can reduce these risks and challenges significantly. Because if a country individually goes for the debt swap, the lender can take it as a capacity not to pay the debt. But if this is an effort driven by the global players, global actors, by the agencies like UN, then these risks and the perceptions or the bad signaling can be reduced significantly, as was in the debt reliefs in the COVID-19. Many countries, including Pakistan, has had the debt relief without any bad signaling because it was a global effort. So we think that debt swaps as a global effort can reduce that bad signaling to a large extent. And this is why we started in the first slide that we need to make a kind of alliance or a joint effort from the developing high debt countries. And then multilateral agencies like UN and multilateral institutions like IMF, World Bank, KDB can lead the work on promoting debt for nature. By promoting it mean that bringing evidence either way. I mean, it can be either way, the evidence that comes. What are the modalities? What is the policy research that is required that can come from some very technically strong institutions and who is more stronger on our multilateral institutions to bring the evidence. What can be the best way to do it? What are the challenges that needs to be tackled in this one? What are the principles on which we need to go for the debt swaps and draw some guiding lines? And then definitely, as they have a very strong role in terms of development partner in developing countries, they can be used to ensure implementation of debt swaps effectively. G20 Debt Surveillance Initiative, DSSI, as the best platform for debt management solutions for debt for nature. Currently, it has been working for the debt reliefs, but it can be sort of in the long run used as a platform for debt swaps. Another point that I think can minimize the individual country is that instead of asking individual countries to make a request for debt swaps, the technical committee that definitely remains how it can be made, formed to decide eligibility, can be formed actually, to decide the eligibility and the size of the debt swaps for different countries. And this, I think there can be, for example, some indicators. What is the highest vulnerability? What is the vulnerability to climate change? What is their contribution to emissions which they are actually making? So the countries having a lower share in the emissions but highest on the vulnerability is actually being penalized by other countries. So that is the where you can put some similar kind of mechanisms where committee at international level using D20, that's the DSSI forum can see, and instead of asking country to country request, they can decide. And then the one difference that this time is emerging in debate, at least so far, we don't have any conclusive evidence on this one, that instead of going to the debt secondary market, like it has been working in the 80s, it can be a country to country, borrower to lender direct talks, instead of bringing a third party who buys the debt in the secondary market and then resells it. That complicates the process actually, and it prolongs. And particularly the discussion that is coming at this point of time is that given the size of debt swaps which are being considered or which are being discussed, at least, it will be very difficult for some organizations which have been coming as a third party to buy the debts and then sells to at a lower value, at a discount rate. It's difficult. So country to country discussions, like it has been in the debt reliefs in COVID-19, can help overcome those complexities. And definitely engaging private sector will remain a very key that we have highlighted. But if there are structures that can be aligned for the private sector, there is a discussion going on that there can be incentives in the market, incentives that can be designed, but that is at a very premature level. So they can be engaged in those next steps. So Lara, please, next, just on concluding. These are a couple of recent changes. While we totally understand the complexities and the challenges that remain in the debt swaps, there are a couple of some hopeful factors which we can rely on. The first is that there is a growing concern about the environment. It was not in 80s when it was the debt swaps. For example, the Bolivia debt swap in 87 was more because the country was defaulting because of high prices, high debt, high interest rate. They were defaulting, so there was something, okay, let's save something. But the concern on environment was not that high as is now. So that can have different ground on which the people can build on the debt swaps. Second, the concern over shared development is growing. SDGs Agenda 2030 is a more inclusive and a more a kind of participatory than the MDGs actually. So this initiative like shared development along with higher focus on environmental improvement can provide a base to start at least discussions on. And the crisis like COVID-19 has shown that if one country is not safe, no other country is safe actually. So the development is now the shared development. Uneven development can actually block the global development to a large extent. So this is another added lesson. And particularly the awareness and on the mainstreaming of climate change and economic policy is on the rise. But we at SDPI are also talking is on climate in all and all in climate model of the economic policy making. Do not take climate change as a residual policy, make it as a central to the economic policy. So that is also rising. And finally, the Paris Club of Characters have accumulated experience with DFES mechanisms, which make such transactions feasible in the future. So I think given all this, we can at least start identifying those challenges and preparing some grounds on the debt first swaps as a long-term green financing tool. And this is last just close. And this is some of the work that we have been doing at SDPI in terms of green recovery. I thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Sajid. Great presentation, and I hope that it has provided a great insight on the opportunities and the challenges it could bring for Pakistan. Moving on, I would like to give a floor to Mr. Faisal to start discussion on the green recovery from the energy and the power sector angle. And this is in collaboration with us, SDPI and BPIB, and we'll be doing a joint presentation. So as I'm moderating, I will give a floor to Faisal first, and then I'll take a lead afterwards.
Thank you, Dr. Hina, and very good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Next, please. The COVID-19 has imposed some serious impact on economic and energy parameters worldwide, and Pakistan is not any exception. So we can see that in Pakistan, there was a drop in GDP, increase in fiscal deficits, the increase in inflation numbers, unemployment, and then net lending and borrowing ratio was increased. The government gross debt percentage, which was 78.6% before COVID, that went to 79.1%. Similarly, on energy sides, there were issue with the recoverables receivables of discos because of some physical constraints, and that dropped to 88.7% from 90.2%. The final energy consumption also went down, and then same is with the electricity generation consumption. The peak hour based demand was the deficits. In fact, that is a surplus number, because it was if before COVID it was 1,000 megawatts. During the COVID it was 1,500 megawatt now. So these are the numbers which are based on the NEPRA State of Industry report and the socio-economic impact of coronavirus disease 2019 study by Dr. Sajid Amin. So this just showcased the impact of COVID on Pakistan's economic and energy sector. Next, please. So there's something positive, but it's not in fact positive, because it's due to the COVID that overall reduction in emissions, and in Lahore, which is the second most populous city of country, the air quality improved by 61%. The PM concentration was 61% lower than the previous years before COVID, and followed by Peshawar and then Karachi. So overall, if we for the achievement of Paris agreements, 7.6% reduction of emissions are required, whereas 2020 globally it was 8%. So next, please. So the scope of the study is to find the short-term impact on economy and energy sector of energy and power sector of Pakistan, and to build back better with some policy and strategy measures through green stimulation packages, and to follow the NDC National Determined Contribution paths in line with the Paris agreements. Next, please. With the negative impact on economy, the State Bank of Pakistan took some policy measures, and they reduced the monetary policy rate from 13.2% to 7%. Further, they increased the loan settlements for importer and exporter to 180%. Besides some policy support to small medium enterprises, and some DBR was also reduced from 60%, increased from 50 to 60%. So that were some policy supports which were provided to businesses to continue their business as they were continuing before COVID hit the country. Next, please. So the government of Pakistan overall provided 1.2 trillion economic relief package for the COVID to meet the crisis of COVID-19. That includes Asas emergency cash program that was launched by Planning Commission of Pakistan, and then some food subsidies to the poor income people. Then 115 billion for health and food supplies, 110 billion for relief in power bills, and 100 billion for emergency energy provisions. Besides issuing some green euro bonds and nature conservative funds, besides Pakistan had 10 billion tree tsunami projects. So these were some green measures which were taken by government of Pakistan to build back better scenario. So the framework of the study consists of assessing the long-term impact of green simulation policies against different dimensions of socio-economic and energy and environment dimensions. It's a 20 years horizon, which is modeled for energy supply demands, emissions, and power consumption and power generation for overall economic recovery and baseline scenarios. So the long-range energy alternative planning LEAP 2015 model is used for the modeling the results. Next, please. So we have developed the 4 scenarios. The first one was the pre-COVID, which is based on 2019. That is, if the COVID would not have happened, then where the energy sector and the economy of the country would have. And then business as usual, where the 1-year recovery period has been considered, that if we come back in 1 year, it's based on the IGCEP 2021 numbers. The power numbers are electricity numbers are based on IGCEP 2021, which has been recently approved by the NEPRA. So this is the latest documents. And then slow recovery. It's if we recover in 3 years. So where the energy demand and electricity demand would be by 2030, and what will be the projected emissions of the country. And then the COVID green recovery. So that is similar to business as usual. The only difference is that here some energy efficiency measures and some green policies and green initiatives have been considered, that how if these policies and these strategies has been adopted by the government and policymakers, then how the recovery period recovery will be from the COVID-19. Next, please. So this is just a working shell, as I already described, that there are 4 scenarios, and that the result of these 4 scenarios will clearly indicate the pathways and the gap of the existing policies and frameworks for the policy makers to come up and adopt these measures which are practicable to recover the economy as it would have before the COVID-19. So now I hand over to Dr. Hina to present the findings of the report. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Moving forward. As we all have some numbers written in the executive summary where it clearly describes the projections in each scenario from the baseline to 2030 and also 2040, I would like to give a brief overview of how do we see it happening through the slides. So if we look at the projections of the economic growth in pre-COVID times, the GDP growth was to above 800 billion in 2040. In the case of fast economic recovery, the GDP growth could reach up to maximum of 600 billion by 2040. And in the terms of slow economic recovery, it could reach to around 520 billion by 2040. In terms of energy demand, we sorry. In 2019, it was around 68, as per the graph, 68 MTOE, including the non-commercial use of biomass. And demand during the COVID in 2020 fell by around 8.8%. As we projected through the model, the pre-COVID times, in a slow recovery process, the difference was further alleviated. If the COVID impacts last for the 3 years, then by 2030, the energy demand was to reach around 107, which is around 25% less than the value in pre-COVID and 5% less in the fast recovery. In the green recovery, the demand could further drop to slightly after 2024 due to the use of energy efficient technologies and the incorporation of all the energy efficiency in the power sector. Demand in 2030 was projected to be lower than the pre-COVID scenario. Moving on. If you looked at the emission side, to a larger extent, it could mirror the trend of the energy consumption. As we see from the pre-COVID times, it was around 350 megatons by 2040, and in the post-COVID business as usual scenario, it was 250 megaton by 2040. But in the case of green recovery, it could reduce down to 200 megawatt by 2040. In the terms of energy generation mix, in the pre-COVID scenario, it was predominantly leading to more of a infusion of more coal-based power generation in the pipelines, and also the long-term contracts with the imported fuels. But this green recovery scenario is basically more modeled on the recent IGCEP and also the ARE policy 2019, where it envisages to have 60% clean energy. As we see from the graph, there's a forecast of 2030 mixed post-COVID and a 2040 mixed green recovery, where we see a huge incorporation of the solar and wind and hydropower, and less amount of coal. As we see in the 2040, it could reduce down to 10%, which is actually leading into a more resilient and more climate pathway for the sustainable future of Pakistan. In terms of in the energy sector investments, Pakistan by 2030 would have needed around 108 billion and 135 by 2035. However, due to the COVID having declined in investments, it could need more about 10 billion. In the terms of the scenario modeling, and as we saw in the green recovery scenario, it would require around 120 billion by 2030. This is actually comparable with the recent revised NDCs we have got, that is 101, very close. So for putting Pakistan's energy sector back on the track, the country would have to manage around these energy investments in the clean energy sources by the difference between the pre-COVID times and the green recovery scenario. If you look at particularly the power sector investments, it would require, in terms of green recovery, it would require around 15.2 billion additional by 2040. So that's the share in the power sector that would be required. According to the recent IGCEP, the total NPV of the power sector would be around $31.6 billion. So moving on to the key takeaways, we do see serious economic implications if we are delaying the recovery, and an accelerating revenue administration should be prioritized. And for the green economy, energy efficiency is very critical, which could save around 9% of the energy by 2030. And the measures can lower the emissions by 16% by 2040, and it can save around 3 billion in a single year by 2030 and 9 billion by 2040. In terms of the post-COVID emissions, it's important to highlight that is this drop in the emissions is also highlighted by Faisal, that it's also because of the lower demand. So lower economic growth should not be taken as a low emission strategy. What it needs to have is increased reliance on the variable renewable energy resources post 2030, which could lead to annual levelized cost saving of around 4 billion. So in 2040, the share of solar and wind investments could be 26.5% against their generation share of 36%. There are some key challenges and limitations in terms of what we saw in the recent policy documents that have been just provided. So, some of the risk accounting has been missing. We saw some of the issues related with the implementation periods of hydropower projects in the IGCEP. There's some of the coal phase out projects as we aspire to do, and our LNG to become stranded assets, the existing ones, as also Dr. Abid has highlighted some of the economic figures that are very rightly associated with the existing power plants. COVID recovery has been sharp rise in the price of coal and LNG. That is the recent development, and we aim to develop another scenario based on the recent spike in the price. The other is, as we see the COVID-19, the pandemic is still uncertain. We were, as we were developing this report, we were hoping that we are doing it for the 1 year, the 2 years, but as it continues, we'll be having uncertain developments coming along the way. So it will be, we are aiming to have a dynamic and adding on more scenarios to get right projections for the future. We need to have more focused on energy efficiency. Green stimulus, as we all have stressed upon, needs to have a very critical role, and in terms of policymakers to be able to identify and allocate more resources towards clean energy investments. So it's better for the employment, for the income growth. We need to mobilize private sector investments, banking guidelines, ESG profiles, bond strategic risk sharing. In terms of transitional impacts of green recovery, transfer and exchange of low carbon technologies, climate negotiations, practice data sharing, increased reliance on the variable energy resource, renewable energy resources across the value chains and the sectors. The evaluation framework with the key indicators such as green jobs, mix, green products, efficiency, and building long-term evaluation framework with these measures. Other than that, restructuring subsidies, financing models, rural supply chains, and support the sectors with the green capital market, and building long-term priority provision and environmental risk assessments and compliance would be the way forward. This is all from my side, and I would like to move on quickly to the next session, where we would begin with the discussion on these reports that we have presented, and also discussing about how do we see the pandemic affecting climate and environmental diplomacy in Pakistan. How could we see that, given this magnitude of climate urgency and the challenge we face, we really need to go and make use of the low carbon solutions. How is Pakistan scaling up the green technologies to accelerate the delivery, and how it could have financial support not just domestically allocating the budget resources in the federal and provincial level, but also coping up with adaptation and mitigation through international agreements and negotiations as we are moving towards COP. So this is going to be the baseline for the discussion for the next session, that I would like to begin with a keynote speech from Mr. Shahjahan Mirza, Managing Director, PPIB and CEO, AEDB, to please have your, thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Hina. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. It is indeed my pleasure and privilege to speak to this important discussion regarding green financing and economic recovery of Pakistan, including the debt swap arrangement. I think that this is a very timely event in terms of COP26. So, as you are aware, Government of Pakistan is emphasizing on utilization of green and clean energy sources to keep the country's GHG emissions in limit, in line with the UN Sustainable Development Goals SDG 7, which actually is ensuring of access to affordable, reliable, sustainable, clean and modern energy for all by 2030. Although it is a gigantic task, because even today we have around less than 70% population which have access to the electricity. And the same is true for probably the other energy resources also. The current government has shown strong commitment towards increasing the share of renewable energy in terms of 2019 RE policy, where the target has been set by increasing the RE share in power generation by 20% by 2025 and 30% by 2030. Currently, it's only 5%. So we have to take it up by another 25% in the next 10 years. And if we include hydropower, the share of renewable energy in overall energy mix of the power sector will be over 60% by 2030. But of course, as we have seen, the green financing requirement, it requires at least $25 billion investment to achieve this goal. As per IGCEP, the Indicated Generation Pension Plan, which has been talked, I think, in all the presentation, the total and green energy in installed capacity by 2030 will be over 61%, which includes 22% of share of renewable, which is solar, wind, and bagasse. And if we include hydropower in it, which would be targeted to 39%, the overall share will be 61%. One point which has been raised, I think, very valid point in the presentation of Dr. Hina, that is that probably this IGCEP is being prepared first time, so it has some deficiencies and shortcomings, which we also realize in the power sector. But the better part is that this IGCEP is going to be reviewed every year, so it is to be updated. So whatever shortcomings are there, we will certainly try to improve it. But the important thing is at least we have done a 10-year plan in the power sector. Previously, what we have seen in the power sector, I think all of you will be familiar, that we have been moving in circles, in cycles since 1980s. So we get into the shortage, then we start getting whatever we can get quickly, which is generally not very optimized in terms of pricing, in terms of efficiency, in terms of fuel selection. But since the country has been running into the shortage of 12, 14, 16 hours, so the governments were basically forced to make those deals which were probably not most economical and most optimal deals. So I think by doing this exercise of the IGCEP, we will, inshallah, come out of this dilemma that we don't know what we will be doing in the next 5 years. So we are now certain that we have planned to implement. The NPV of investment in this IGCEP is around $39.2 billion in terms of CapEx and OPEX. And in terms of only CapEx, if we look at it, is $25 billion investment in this clean and green energy. And this is only the generation side. So there's certainly a proportion of investment which will come into the transmission and the distribution side, which is at least maybe 50 to 60% of this investment. So this is a gigantic task for a country like Pakistan to raise this kind of investment. A recent World Bank report titled Variable Renewable Energy Integration and Planning Study in Pakistan, which was developed with the support of Alternative Energy Development Board, suggests that substantial potential of solar and wind generation in Pakistan could save about 2 to 6 billion US dollar by reducing its CO2 emission close to 50 GT by maximally using RE potential and by avoiding external cost of CO2 emissions. It is also pertinent to highlight that globally Pakistan is amongst the countries having lowest per capita carbon footprint. This is in the context of, I think it's pertinent to talk about this because there's a lot have been talk about rolling back the coal power plants and the issues and the cost which is involved. So it is globally Pakistan is amongst the countries having lowest per capita carbon footprint. The country's per capita carbon emission figure is 1.01 metric ton, which is less than 1% share of the global emission. But at the same time, as it has been pointed out, that probably in spite of having very low carbon emission, and we have the threats level is very high for Pakistan. Currently in Pakistan, we have 12% share of coal in the power generation, which is much lower than our neighboring countries. But this obviously does not de-emphasize the requirement for improving the environment and making less and less coal in the energy mix. It is also pertinent, I think, to highlight that all these coal-based power plants in Pakistan are being developed and strictly in compliance with the World Bank and IFC environmental standard. Our local NDC's environmental standards are not so stringent, but so all these power plants which are being set up, they are following the World Bank and the IFC environmental standards. And what so far we have seen, although these plants are new, but still their emission levels are much lower. In some cases, 1/4 of what is the allowed environmental emission level by the World Bank and the IFC. The study which has been jointly prepared is very timely when Pakistan is endeavoring to come out of COVID-19 impact and ambitiously moving towards clean energy transition as well as development of electricity trading market to bring competition, efficiency, and affordability in the electricity value chain. The government has very elaborate plan to implement and start the competitive trading market in the power sector by April next year, so on which work is going on. That will certainly bring in efficiency and the competition and obviously reduce the price. Pakistan has adoption needs, as already pointed out, 6 to 14 billion per year, where 70% goes into infrastructure and damage loss, whereas clean energy transition would require a total of 101 billion investment by 2030 as per updated NDCs of 2021. So the number I was talking of 25 billion US dollar, that was the power sector, but the NDC put a target of 101 billion investment, which has been released last week by the Ministry of Climate Change. The availability of financing is a very important element for making the transition towards the clean future. All major international lending agencies are providing financing for ARE projects in Pakistan. But one thing I think which is noticeable that in Pakistan, whatever financing is being provided for RE project, it's at the same lending rates and the premiums which is being given to the coal and the thermal projects. So that's why that's the issue we are raising with the multilateral donor agencies and the banks, that if we want to promote the RE and the clean energy, they should give some due consideration to the lending rate. So that's the area on which we are working. The State Bank of Pakistan is already providing a concessional financing of 6% for RE power projects. So they have limited it to 50% of the project cost, but still I think it's a great incentive. And this is being done for even the rooftop solar. One of the scheme which was introduced by the government a few years back, that is the net metering scheme, under which you set up a rooftop solar project, and then you can sell spare extra electricity to the grid, and whenever you need, you can get that. And this scheme is a tremendous success because the tariff are increasing. Currently, over 16,000 consumers have installed this system, and the capacity has crossed 260 megawatt. Which is a large number, and which is of course a clean energy. So this event and this report, I think this is a very good contribution. And from the learned panelists and stakeholders, if they could provide their input, these reports will help a lot in preparing for the COP26. I hope this event will provide opportunity to all stakeholders and participants to discuss and take stock of Pakistan green financing strategy, and identify key priority areas that need to be addressed in the climate action of Pakistan, and adopt build back better Pakistan from energy demand and economic outlook as per the finding and recommendations of these reports. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Shah Jahan Sahab. It was really great insight and overall view. And as you said, it could provide very good, useful for all the stakeholders and in this sector. I would just like to quickly move on to Dr. Sardar Muazzam Sahab from NECA, MD, Managing Director, National Energy Efficiency and Conservation, NECA, to have his insights on the.
सेक्रेटरी साहब कर लें सेक्रेटरी साहब कर लें
कर लें पहले?
हाँ
Okay.
सेक्रेटरी साहब कर लें
All right, so as we are a bit stretch of a time, I would like to give the floor to our esteemed guest, special guest, Mr. Ali Raza Bhutta, Secretary Power Division from Ministry of Energy, for his remarks. Please.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Very well. Yes.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Abid Suleri and Mr. Shahjahan Mirza, other distinguished participants. Thank you for inviting me to speak on this occasion. It's first of all, let me start by appreciating the very timely organization of this discussion in anticipation of COP26. So all of us can focus on the issues related to climate change. I will just speak very briefly on the power sector's contribution towards climate. Power sector, of course, as all of you know, is dependent to a certain extent on fossil fuels. But Pakistan's position globally is actually very good. We have are very in terms of contributions to greenhouse gas emissions. Pakistan is almost a negligible contributor. Our energy mix today, even today, is quite healthy in this regard. We make about 29% of our electricity with hydropower, and the contribution of wind, solar, and bagasse is at the moment very small, but is projected to increase significantly over the coming years. At the moment, we are producing about 3% of our energy from wind-based plants, 1% from solar, and 1% for bagasse. On the other hand, fossil fuels are 19% of our energy is coming from furnace oil, only 13% from coal, out of which 11% is imported and 2% is local. And gas, of course, over the last few years, the contribution of gas has increased to about 27%. But our commitments and Government of Pakistan's policies in this regard are actually quite progressive. What we have been doing over the last 2 or 3 years is in an effort to transform the power sector. And as during this discussion, you have heard other speakers also telling you about the problems in the power sector. We are trying to correct a number of them, and one of the most significant development, two of the most significant developments in that regard are the approval this year in June of the National Electricity Policy, and that policy has a very strong focus on indigenization and environment. As last year, the Council of Common Interests approved the alternative and renewable energy policy, and that policy we have started implementing that, and there again, the focus is on reducing costs of production and inducting more and more renewables on the principles of least cost. Another major development this year, actually only last month, was the approval of the indicative generation capacity expansion plan. Pakistan has been is inducting generation plants for its national grid without too much of planning, unfortunately. We were dependent significantly on hydel generation, but since the 90s, we've had a number of policies which were aimed at attracting investment in electricity generation, but those were not based on a perspective plan. So we were not actually projecting our demand into the future and were not planning supply accordingly. As most of these policies were first come, first served basis, and provided a lot of incentives for investors, but as resulted in situations where we were in cycles where we had a short supply in the system, and then when we had excess supply. Currently, we are in a situation that for the next few years, we would have excess capacity. There would not be sufficient demand in the sector, and if the capacity that we would have for generation of electricity would be significantly more than that demand. Now that creates a situation of financial unsustainability for the sector, and we have to correct that. And in order to do just that, we have used best international practices and have developed this indicative generation capacity expansion plan, which is again is because the cost of renewables is coming down. That plan now includes, starting from the year 24 till 2030. It's a 10-year progressive rolling plan. We see that we would need addition of renewable electricity generation plants, and mostly wind and solar, up to the year 2030. That is based on our current projections of demand growth over the next 10 years. So with this, what we are seeing, looking forward to in the next 10 years, is that by 2030, our generation mix would have changed significantly in favor of renewables. We are hoping and planning that by 2030, 41% of our energy would be in the power sector, would be coming from hydel generation, and about 3% from wind, and 13% from solar, and 1% from bagasse. So combined together, we would be about 58% of our energy would be coming from these renewable sources. If you add to that 6% coming from nuclear, which is with no carbon emissions, and 2% that we will be importing from the Central Asian countries, and that too is hydel energy. Our clean, completely clean portfolio comes to about 66%. by 2030. And again, there is another 17% which will be coming from gas. So with significantly lesser emissions, and only 15% by 2030 from coal and 2% from furnace oil. So the direction that we have set this year for the power sector is strongly tilted in favor of renewables and a movement away from fossil fuels. Having said that, what is important to note is that that the per capita energy consumption in Pakistan is extremely low. At the moment, we consume our per capita consumption is 0.6 megawatt hours per capita per year, which if you compare it with the United States of America, where it is 13%, or China, where it is about 5%, or most of the Europe numbers, which are close to 7 megawatt hours per capita. Even regionally, India's per capita energy consumption is twice as much as Pakistan's. Now, if you compare that to the again to the percentage that comes from coal, and rather than the percentage, if you just look at sheer numbers, and then I will also mention the percentages. Pakistan stands nowhere as far as generation of electricity from coal is concerned. At the moment, we are producing about 4,600 megawatts from coal. Compare this to more than 1 million megawatts from coal in China, about more than 200,000 megawatts from coal in India, almost 250,000 megawatts in the US. Even Germany produces 10 times more energy from coal than we do. And the reason I'm mentioning this is that Pakistan's contribution to in this respect is almost minimal. You consider both the per capita energy consumption and the percentage of the energy being generated from coal or even from fossil-based fuels. We are, but this does not compare at all with the socio-economic condition of Pakistan. What we need to do in Pakistan is to improve our per capita GDP, and for that we need to invest and expand our industrial production, and for that we need more energy. With the COP26 conference coming up, with this transition away from coal discussion taking place, I think that is a discussion not relevant to Pakistan. It is definitely relevant globally, but what we have to provide to the people of Pakistan is sustainable, affordable energy, and we need energy, much more of it than we have right now. So there is, I would like this discussion group and others to focus on more on adaptation than on mitigation as far as Pakistan is concerned. There might be opportunities of mitigation in a number of sectors, but that has to be kept in a perspective. Not a very fashionable thing these days to say, but an important perspective, in my view, and must be kept in the background of any discussion that we have on this. As in addition to that, we are to some of the steps that I've mentioned earlier. There are other things that we are doing in the sector, particularly in the sector of energy efficiency. So we want whatever limited number of megawatts per capita that we have, go further. And that, I think, is Sardar Mozam, I can see, is there. And I heard that he was about to speak. So I would like you to listen to him very carefully, because that is a sector that we have not invested in, has not been a focus. And that is where a lot of emissions can actually be prevented if we have energy efficiency practices more prevalent in the country. I'll stop there. Thank you very much for having me, and I wish you the best for your discussion.
Thank you. Thank you so much for your valuable time and great insights. Very encouraging to see lots of development happening towards the energy efficiency improvements and the clean energy targets, and an extreme inclination towards meeting the climate goals as part of the adaptation and mitigation strategies. So moving on, as already been invited by Ali Raza Saab, I would like to give a floor to Dr. Sardar Mozam Saab. If you could tell us about the energy efficiency measures. We also highlighted in our report that how it could save into billions the economy of the sector, Pakistan.
Thank you very much. And I think I'll just start with emphasis with what Secretary Saab just mentioned, that when we are talking about net zero emissions, the net zero emissions should come with net zero poverty as well. Because when we are sort of linking them together, I think this is a very clear concern in the social perspective and socioeconomic side, that in all the debates, and globally we are facing this kind of challenge, that net zero emission and the per capita consumption, that is one of the challenge which we are facing. So I just want to sort of come up with this simple thing. I think the goal which already been set in your study, that 9 MTOE saving is one of the things that has been highlighted, and $3 billion US saving in that regard. I think there has been a proven case studies, for example, in case of Turkey, where they have spent 4.5 billion and saved 1.5 in first year billion in energy efficiency. So the goal is, without compromising the energy consumption need of any individual, how we can lower the intensity, how we can produce the same GDP with the same or lesser amount of energy. I think that is what we are trying to project here, that this is the energy efficiency needs in this country. Undoubtedly, a unit saved is much cheaper than producing unit of electricity from any source of energy. But I think one of the things which is in terms of green financing and economic recovery at a broader level, where I think Secretary Saab highlighted a very important point, that the overall energy efficiency and conservation has been missing from the landscape of energy planning and overall this context. I think this policy, NEP, clearly provides a cornerstone and a clear-cut message in that section 5.7, where energy efficiency has been highlighted, and that provides us sort of areas where we can contribute. I think the challenge with the energy sector, especially, I'm not saying for the power sector, but for overall energy sector, is we were having this discussion this morning with JZ as well, that there are peaks. especially in the winter, we have shortage of a gas, and in summer, we are trying to meet the demand for the winter season. And for rest of the years, the capacity payments and these kind of challenges we are facing overall. I think this is where energy efficiency can play its role, that how we can design from the demand side management of this energy that you don't have to generate that much, or you plan in that way that you can do the peak shaving for that time period. And this will, except for these peak, that how it will help, also for the rest of the year, this will help us to sort of address this kind of dilemma. So I think there has been a clear sort of priority, and there has been a clear sense of this urgency that has been already highlighted. And we have been working on it. NICA has prepared the strategic plan where we have identified in terms of industrial, in terms of different sectors of economy, where industry is building and transport being the highest, where energy efficiency and conservation is the key areas to address. I think one more thing in the context where we are working was primarily the institutional apparatus in the country, that we had this act, and then overall the human resource, the budget allocation, how to sort of develop this in the country, the provincial aspects. I think I must say that currently with the support of the ministry and overall support, the institutional process is almost where we think of in terms of budget allocation, in terms of human resource, in terms of policy. There are a number of these things that have been almost completed, and we are moving into a next phase where we are moving for operationalization. And then the implementation part is where we are working on. It has been, very interesting things that during this time, how effectively different institutions are looking into it. NICA was on the forefront to provide a support to Ministry of Climate Change, while in the revisions of NDCs as well. And I think this work has also given a lot of data and participation from a bottom-up approach in this regard as well. But I think one of the proposals, which when I'm also dealing with some of the work on hydrogen fuel, and there was a work going on, and we were engaged with that. There is always, a pressure on the compacts on coal. And as Secretary Saab mentioned, like our contribution is smaller, and still we are being asked to reduce our coal emissions. I think in parallel where we stand, and if we give this commitment, another question is also like what you'll get in return of it. Because we are seeing that an Italian government is bringing compact on hydrogen fuel in this COP. India is establishing themselves as a hub for hydrogen fuel. Japanese are already working on it. China has recently signed some of these agreements. So I think it's also important, like looking into the efficiency standpoint of view and new innovations in that direction, that how we can effectively work on it. Now, the last part, which I just want to highlight, coming back to this financing and economic recovery, I think Sajid Saab paper already highlighted, especially the numbers. If you put $1 in terms of fossil fuels, how much jobs you just generate 2.7 jobs. If you put $1 on renewable, 7.5, and the highest number of jobs you can produce out of it is when you put $1 on renewable energy. So I think that is the kind of understanding we see in that context. But again, there is one aspect which we feel is missing when there is financing window available from the State Bank for renewable energy. The same energy efficiency window is not available for that. So the green banking guidelines provide us some space, but its true implementation and in the context of the green financing, I think in that case, this space is still, still remain unattended. And that's where we see a lot more sort of opportunities coming to Pakistan. And I think last part with the economic recovery, again, we can see the impacts with all the energy projects, either from the generation standpoint of view, they will be always concentrated geographically in a single position, which has geostrategic or overall any of these advantage, having a high solar irradiance, wind corridors. And this is how we are sort of looking into the job creation, because this is the nature endowments. I think when it comes to energy efficiency, it's all scattered. And this single initiative, if we can say the mandatory audits of the public building, for example, that can create jobs across the country. And then we have not yet discovered the energy saving certificates, how we can work on different models where we can connect with that kind of thing. Also connecting with RE on when it comes to net metering, and a slight change in the regulation can help us sort of develop a different financing for even net metering projects. So I think overall, when we look into it, the work done by different countries, such as white certificates by Italian government, Middle East, and all these countries, I think the recent focus in the pandemic era is mostly, if you look at the International Energy Agency's work and all of this, there has been always and more emphasis on energy efficiency in that context. So I think I must say this thing, conclude this thing, that with the current setup in the country and with the support we are seeing coming from the ministry, from the government, from the budget allocation, I think this is a very promising aspects which have been already dealt with. And I hope that within a very short time, once things will be more operational, there will be more action and things happening in energy efficiency and conservation.
Thank you so much, Dr. Morgan. It was really useful for us to understand that the recent focus and the current focus of the way forward is the energy efficiency. And the measures and the strategies we take today will be shaping up the future of the clean energy. So as you talked about the renewable energy certificates, the other best practices from the world, I think it would be very helpful to learn from them, and it could be adopted in the context of Pakistan. Moving on, I'll quickly give the chance to Ms. Kashmala to have her insights on from the climate finance perspective, as you've been working in this field in Pakistan. So, yeah.
Thank you very much, Dr. Hina, for having me here, and it's a pleasure to be amongst the people who are actually behind creating the sort of energy that we need in Pakistan to move forward on these issues. So COVID, as we all know, has been a tipping point. We all know that the economic decisions that we take today are going to impact the way we're going to achieve, say, our Paris Agreement or the SDG goals. And we've had people globally talking about how important this is. It's a great opportunity to build back better, green recovery. And this is the opportunity that we all need to seize. And within the framework of, say, climate finance, there's been a lot of discussion about how the developing countries are most vulnerable and they need the most help in terms of affordable finance. And then, so therefore we can actually help them towards a low carbon economy. And so we create the right sort of green jobs, etc. And all of that is very great. That whole, that the preamble that we create is very great. But at the same time, when we look at the data, let's look at what happened in the last year. G20 countries in the last year, in the post-COVID, so to speak, recovery period, injected about $11 trillion into their economies. And according to reports, 16 out of the 20 G20 countries have actually invested in areas and sectors which are going to be environmentally creating a negative impact on the environment. So while it's very important that we preach to the developing countries and tell them how important it is to start building back better and start moving towards a low carbon economy, that's all very good. But where the actual buck is, where the money is, you actually see where it's going. And when you look at the 11 trillion that has been spent in 1 year across these economies, you compare that to the $100 billion that we keep talking about for climate finance since 2009, that has yet to be actually accounted the way that it is. We're still grappling with whether that has actually been transferred to developing countries or not. So it's very good. These are all very good buzzwords. I've been attending COPs for the last, say, 10 years, and COP26 is all about green recovery. So my word of caution to Pakistan in general is, let's not get on the bandwagon without realizing what our own needs are, without realizing what our, as Mohsen Saab said, it's not just about net zero emissions, it's also about reducing poverty, right? Actually going to some of our SDG targets as well. So it's not just about addressing one target, one international commitment, but also there's others that we also need to take care of. So within that sort of preamble, I want us to understand green financing from three components. We've had a lot of discussion around the sort of tools that should be at play, etc. But whenever you talk about green financing, there's the government, which does the regulation, which does the institutional setup, which actually creates, say, the incentives, subsidies, etc. Then, of course, there's the businesses, which actually brings in the technology, the finances, the local know-how, the technology, etc. But then something that is equally the third component, which is actually your citizen. Their willingness to pay, their willingness to actually start looking at eco-friendly products to start investing in. And that's where renewable energy efficiency comes in a big way. Whenever we talk about financing, we're always looking at it from one of the two perspectives, but never really including the citizens in creating the right level of awareness in terms of how, if that component is missing, it's always very difficult to create the demand for such products if we don't consider that in a big way. Quickly, in terms of, so we heard a lot about, and then an excellent presentation by Dr. Sajid Saab on the debt for nature swap. I'm not an expert in this area, but there is a concept of debt for nature, but then there's always the other area that Pakistan is also looking at is nature performance bonds. And I believe they're slightly different in terms of when debt for nature is primarily whatever money you're swapping is actually has to be spent on enhancing your ecosystem. Whereas your nature performance bonds are more sort of a KPI, where if you achieve X, Y, and Z in terms of improving your ecosystem, whatever reduction you get in terms of your interest rate reduced on your loans, etc., you can spend it wherever, on schools, educations, whatever development goals that the country may have. So for Pakistan to actually consider what's important, do we spend domestically on our own ecosystems, and then as a KPI request for then enter into these nature bonds, or you actually get into a system that has already been discussed by Dr. Sajid Saab. Equally, I don't know, I was reading also up in Malaysia, one of the other bonds that they have launched are the green sukuk bonds. So you're actually tapping into the whole Islamic banking, and it's obviously that needs to be looked at and to see if that's an area that we can equally explore and look at. I'll just close off by sharing some of my thoughts on what we're going into COP. This COP, of course, it's also it's important because Paris Agreement will be operationalized. This is when whatever commitments we have put into our NDCs, the clock has started ticking now. That's great. Operationally, all of those things will be taken care of. But at the same time, from a climate finance perspective, we're going to be globally setting a new target. So it's not, so the 100 billion, there's a lot that we need to learn from. As developing countries, there's a lot of conversation we had about, and earlier slides showed what our needs are and what actually the financing opportunities are. So what messaging, what is it that Pakistan needs to go back with when the global financing target is being negotiated at this COP? That process is being initiated. So for example, what should the target be? It should be in line with the needs. Do we know what our needs are? Yes, we have an NDC, that's great. You start talking about climate finance more from a needs perspective as opposed to a number that was just, a figure that was just sort of in Copenhagen back in 2009, sort of brought out without due consideration to the needs of the developing countries. Then, of course, there's financial instruments. We need to start talking about concessional loans. Sir mentioned how there's no incentive for us to actually go into renewable energy. So we need to start speaking about, and similarly for energy efficiency, what sort of financial instruments should Pakistan be negotiating and actually requesting for? How much of it should come from public financing? How much of it should come from private financing? So all these questions at the moment are on the table that are going to be discussed. And I think we're in a great position given the sort of homework that we have done so far, despite whatever little our emissions may be. But just closing in on, let's not get on the bandwagon just because everybody is on that bandwagon. We have to look at our own resources, our own interests, our own needs, and then take action accordingly.
Thank you so much, Tete. Thank you. Thank you for highlighting really pertinent points, especially on the recent financial instruments in the form of bonds, the social bonds, the sukuk bonds. That is was rightly also mentioned in the presentation earlier by Dr. Sajid. And I think really helpful to identify how we should be shaping up and how much should be coming from each source for the finance perspective. Moving on, I would request Mr. Hartmut to have his insights on the discussion that has been happening on the green recovery. If you would have any points to make.
I could have millions of points to make, but I'm very new here in Pakistan, so I do not know the context very well until now. I like to share a few ideas. I think the most important lessons we learned from the COVID crisis is that we can live like here in workshops, in conferences in Glasgow also, where we don't need to travel so much. So we can really save a lot of greenhouse gas emissions, and we are going with the digitalization also in a new era now. This is one of the most important lessons we learned. Then we are talking a lot about climate finance. And it's true, there was this promise, 100,000, and we wanted to go higher. We did not arrive there. But there's also the other question we have really to consider very much. What is climate finance? Is climate finance that we now start with a lot of energy efficiency, a lot of mini grids? Do we pay all the trips to the COP now for a delegation of 300 people from Côte d'Ivoire? Do we pay for all the high salaries of all the experts from industrialist countries coming to other countries to support? What is climate finance? And this is something which is totally not spelled out. And I think if we start to spell it out, the world looks totally different. Another interesting aspect for me today was really this discussion about renewable energy efficiency. And I was confronted this morning already to this discussion for the atmosphere. The atmosphere does not care if the emissions are reduced because of improvement in energy efficiency or renewable energies. I have been in the scene for almost 40 years now on climate change. We started in Germany, and I was in the parliament when we started. So when we started, we were talking about energy efficiency. Renewable energies were something like in the background because they were terribly expensive. Then we came up with the renewable energies, and then this revolution came, and we forgot totally about energy efficiency. What I like to say with this, we have to talk about both. And also in the industrialist countries, energy efficiency is something which is not very well treated. We have so much potential, especially in the sectors of buildings, in the sectors of the transport. Other aspects I like to highlight, Maybe to very shortly introduce, I'm here for this climate and energy initiative between Pakistan and Germany to coordinate it between both of the governments. And for us, it's very important because it's a win-win situation. It's a win-win situation because we need us both, Pakistan, Germany, Germany, Pakistan, and we are together since 70 years in good cooperation. And Germany started to show really how important, how serious they are with climate politics, with 6 countries with these initiatives. Pakistan is the first. On this COP, it will be highlighted as the first climate and energy initiative, which is launched between Germany and Pakistan. And the other countries where it will be launched will sit on the table. I also, another point you told that you would be very much interested to receive some comments on these 2 presentations and publications. For me personally, I'm so new in the subject that I would like to read it. When it comes to climate finance, this will be from our initiative a very, very important issue for the coming years. And this is a field which is changing totally. That means, for instance, green bonds, they are increasing by 100% per year. Now we are learning from Pakistan about nature performance bonds, which is a subject which is totally new to us. So we are also learning, trying to think what it is about in the future. So here we will learn together in this aspect. And then I would highlight the last point, which is important. These are the uncertainties in all the numbers. I heard millions of numbers. I always died because of numbers, because I couldn't really digest them anymore. What I was thinking about, we are talking about the high costs really now for the energy transition. But what I was also thinking about, what cost are we confronting if we are not going together, for instance, Pakistan and Germany, to really go further to mitigation in terms of natural catastrophes arising from climate change? What are the costs? What are the costs for increasing energy prices, which we see now skyrocketing in both in Germany and in Pakistan? These were very shortly my points.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Very insightful. I think quickly, as we have already been out of the time, and we have colleagues with us from media for the media briefing. I would just quickly, because Ali Kamal is here online and has been waiting for 2 hours. And Dr. Faria, if Ali, would you like to comment on today's discussion?
Thank you, Hina, and thank you, friends. Abid Salari Saab, Sajid, Faria, Waqar, Sardar Mozam is here. So I'll be very brief because the time is running fast. Number one is I just heard that SARS program was launched by Planning Commission. It was not launched by Planning Commission Pakistan. One correction which is I'm already asking everyone to do nowadays is that we are already using building back better terminology. MOFA is saying that don't use this method, don't use this term, and they prefer using build forward better. And there is a political economy of this term. So I can talk to Sajid after that. Pandemic, as far as is concerned, the AQI affects positively initially. But the environmentalists know that how positively affecting, what is mean by the positively affecting the overall environment situation. Positively saying that we are in low growth era and let's build better, of course, forward and have resilient and green infrastructure, because we are not going to grow higher because of the stabilization, and since still we are going through higher inflation era. So let's build better in terms of resilient infrastructure. There are different things which have said by Dr. Sajid Amin and Dr. Hina and one of their colleagues, which I agree to, that forming an alliance with the developing countries is one of the great things which we can do. And following that, as Kashmala said, that the bandwagon effect is not very good. But I said, I think that bandwagon effect, when it's easier to obtain funding or debt swap or green financing, when they are tagging to our priorities as well, it is very, very beneficial. So bandwagon effect is not always a bad thing. That's what Kashmala meant as well. It is definitely a very important base for the development if we are talking about the biodiversity, because this is one way of achieving sustainability if we talk about sustainable development goals, but this is not the only way to achieve sustainability. Imran Khan, our Prime Minister, yesterday in a speech said that we have a billion tree tsunami project, and we have already planted 2.5 billion trees, and by 2023 we have been additionally planting 1 billion trees as well. Plus, by 2030 we need to revise our SDG target. For that, the 60% clean fuel energy we will obtain. Right now, we are dumping 2,400 megawatts coal projects, which are signed by China, and we have started 3,700 megawatt renewable, which are replacing those 2,400 megawatt projects. These are the three significant things said by Prime Minister Imran Khan in the speech last night. It is basically height of vulnerability, and it is not because of us that, and there's a question raises that whether we are doing fine when we are having a debt swap or having a green financing for Pakistan, because it's an international climate which is coming from China and India as well, because we cannot control the air. We can so we have to think of on the multiple avenues that we are investing in our own country, and we are asking our developing and neighboring countries to do that as well. Last 2 or 3 points, as Dr. Sajid mentioned in his presentation, that who will lead the debt swap. I'm certain that it is climate change, climate ministry, and secondly, it's an energy ministry who will lead the debt swap. But you can we can differ, which we always do that in a friendly way, and we can discuss about that. As far as the preferred partner is concerned, more the merrier. As many partners we can have it. We have more options for debt swapping, and I saw a list of several partners where we can achieve that. As far as environment is concerned, or bad socially or economically, whatever the reason is, it is important to create a demand and then think of a solution. That's obvious. And demand is there in agriculture sector, demand is there in industrial sector, and demand is there in overall cities when we talk about the overall cities and their development. So identification is the key. I'll stop here. We need to identify, we need our think tanks like STPI and one of my old institute, PIDE, and several other institutes, for example, GCISC and NUST, or any other institute in Pakistan, including the Mehran University. They can identify the problem, they can identify the area where we can have better swap of green financing. We can work with them, including the climate and planning can coordinate with all those think tanks, with the relevant ministries, and have debt swap and green financing. Thank you.
Thank you, Adisa. Thank you. I think we've just come to our last fellow, Dr. Faria, if you're online.
Yes, Dr. Hina, thank you very much. And for the interest of time, I'll be very brief. I will, of course, comment from the perspective of policy design. So yes, green recovery has a strong economic case. And just as Ms. Kashmala highlighted, that let's not get on the bandwagon without knowing what our needs are. So this is exactly what is needed, that policy design needs critical and intricate thinking in terms of green financing and climate finance mechanism. And what is very important is that how do we identify the relevant cost and benefit? And how do we actually consider and create well-defined alternatives or the counterfactual to draw comparison with in this framework? And most importantly, monetizing is an uphill task. It's an uphill task in this macro framework. So how do we actually assign dollar values to these environment instruments? And further, how we consider the problems like externalities in this framework, and how do we model the uncertainty, as we can never predict the future. And further, there are complex causal chains in this climate financing framework, and we must see them from the lens of evidence, and quantifying this causal chain is very important. And just one important point, that most important is considering the distribution of impacts. Because when these macro level policies, they take place, these policies, they create winners and losers. So we must see the distributional impact of this climate financing, whether it's debt nature swapping, and in price tagging of environmental services. Just one of the earlier panelists highlighted that it is very important to consider the role of individuals or the public, their willingness to pay, their preference to pay. That counts a lot, and the dynamics of developing countries are such that they're very different dynamics as compared to developed world. And also one important point that Dr. Sajid's presentation highlighted, the ownership and the responsibilities. The standing is very important. Whose standing counts the most in this framework of climate financing? Whose authority counts the most? Who's making the most difficult decisions? And also the anticipated impact. Who is the one who is actually taking all the impact? So these are all policy questions. These are very pertinent ones, and for a holistic framework, all these hows needs to be answered and taken care of before we actually ride this bandwagon of climate financing, green recovery, and debt nature swap. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Faria. With this, we come to an end, and we have had heard from our distinguished panelists from PPIB, AETB. So I would like to begin with special thanks to you, sir, and for this collaboration on this report, and also engage an active engagement with us throughout preparing this report. I'm also very grateful to the Secretary Power Division, Ali Raza Putta, who could join us virtually, but enriched us with the recent developments happening in the power sector, and with an ambition to fight climate change with the targets and the upscaling of renewable energy projects, along with Ms. Kashmala shedding light on the climate finance and how we could, how it is the need of an hour to look into the financing need of Pakistan. Also joined by Dr. Sardar on really important aspects of how energy efficiency should be prioritized and incentivized as an incentivized solution to towards this clean energy transition in Pakistan, and how we could together all this lead to achieving the goals that we have set for the to combat the impacts of climate change in Pakistan. With this, I would like to give floor to, I would like to request you all to please have some tea, and we can then further continue the discussion with our media colleagues who have just joined us for this briefing, and Dr. Shafkat Munir, who is a research fellow at SDPI, would be moderating the session. So thank you so much for bearing with us and the valuable time and the insights.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
It was a good learning for me also.
Thank you.